Getting called into your boss's office isn't fun. It's one of those things that spurs us into entrepreneurship. The experience of being critiqued, evaluated, or simply judged on our performance. But no one warns you about the loss of structure when you leave the corporate womb. Suddenly, it's all up to you. You're the boss, you make the decisions, and you need to pin down the principles that create structure in your work life, or face the consequences. No one warned Michelle Peters about the loss of structure she would face when she walked through the entrepreneurial exit door. Starting out in electrical engineering, Michelle rose through the ranks to snag corporate leadership positions in the supply chain industry. She always felt like a square peg in a round hole. In 2019, she tossed away her next promotion to dive into the entrepreneurial life she had always admired. Her company is called Supplino. It's a supply chain marketplace that matches suppliers and manufacturers with entrepreneurs and businesses. Today, they work with major companies like Bytes and Unitex. But early on, her lack of structure as an entrepreneur caused her to stumble. She fell victim to hustle culture, overwork, and burnout. Facing each of these challenges in time, she eventually disassembled her embedded corporate mentality and found a winning structure that worked for her, not the other way around. You're about to hear Michelle's journey to make sense of structure as an entrepreneur, her best advice for business owners who hold on to the corporate mentality, and how she's learned to love the inherent uncertainty of her work. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and this is And So She Left, the podcast about incredible women founders and the wisdom they uncovered beyond the corporate world. It's 2019, and Michelle's in the middle of making one of the biggest decisions of her life. Now a 30-year corporate leadership veteran, she's offered a new, shiny position. But rather than taking the promotion like she had done so many times before, she simply walks away.
The next step for me in corporate, I really just didn't want it, that next promotion, and had a chance to leave with a good package and thought, all right, this is my chance. I'm going to jump. I'm going to use the money to start my own company. And so that's what I did.
Naturally, her love of supply chains and manufacturing led her to found Supplino that same year. But why did she leave? And what did she do next?
So corporate for me was very structured over the years, right? I'm in manufacturing and supply chain positions, leadership, strategy positions, always very goal-oriented, worked with great teams, and moved up from an individual contributor up into leadership, right? Like many people in corporate, there were a lot of times where I was frustrated and bored, and I just didn't feel like it was a great use of all of the skills that I had, even though I had some great experiences. I traveled a lot with my job, which I loved. Leaving that womb of corporate, it's still the best thing I ever did, leaving. But it really was jumping into a lake of ice cold water that I didn't anticipate the loss of all that support and structure that I had in corporate. And that was definitely a challenge that I've had to work through over the last couple of years.
That's such a good description. I can totally feel, that moment of immersing yourself into a new environment that is not always pleasant and it's not always friendly. And you have to try and do the best with what you have. And you said earlier that you were like a, round peg in a square hole. And how did you survive that being in a corporate environment, even though you knew that this is not who you were?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a lot of tough years in corporate where I didn't really know what I wanted. I changed roles a lot. I was a person that never had a specific title and job for more than 2 years because I was such an impatient person. I like to learn. I learn quick. And then once I'm in there and the thing is working, right, the department is working, the processes are humming, I very quickly get bored. So I moved jobs a lot. And earlier in my career, I moved to other companies. If the company was small and there wasn't an opportunity there after I had felt like I succeeded, I just went somewhere else. So I had a variety of different companies I worked for, and within those companies at different roles. But at the same time, there was some painful feedback that I had to get when I was a new manager or when I was taking over a department with a different culture that was much more relaxed. I'm a high energy person, and not everybody is like that. But the nice thing about, corporate is you have bosses around you, you have a support network, you have a team, and you can learn through those challenges. So I did, but again, I still never really felt like I was at home in corporate the way I do now, running my own business as an entrepreneur.
Yes, yes. And so let me ask you then, the norms that you followed in order to be successful in corporate, they must be very different now in how you measure your success, and the fact that you don't have a team anymore, the fact that you are alone and you have to find subcontractors, or you have to find another way to measure your success. How does that work for you now?
Yeah, the measurement of success in corporate was often given from above, right? You may make a recommendation on what you think our success metrics should be next year or what your goals should be, but ultimately it all had to be blessed. And often leadership would have some programs that you didn't know about that would come down your way. And so you'd be told, okay, listen, I need you guys to deliver this year. That absolutely does not exist in my world today. And when I started, I was very goal oriented in that my goals were all result metrics, right? My goals were all around, I want to have this much revenue. I want to have this many employees. I want to have this many customers. I want to have this in the pipeline by a certain date, because that's what I was used to. Very structured, smart metrics. 3 years later, I do not use those kinds of metrics for success. I have switched to more plant the seed metrics on how many new connections am I making? How many new customers have I engaged with? How big is our audience? Who knows about us? And am I doing things that are active, that get the audience attention and have customers find out about us? We are a marketplace. So on one hand, I'm, of course, concerned about acquiring customers, but I'm a two-sided marketplace. So the other part is, am I acquiring my experts, my supply chain and manufacturing consultants, and am I keeping them busy? Am I giving them work? And do I have the right kind of people of high caliber that are going to work? So I'm reaching much deeper into the process metrics of my company and the inputs than I am. And I know if I do the work there and I take action, results will come, versus just specifically focusing on results all the time.
Exactly, exactly. And I like how you described it. It's the plant the seed metrics that you don't have to do when you're in corporate.
Right.
But you do have to do it when you're an entrepreneur. And that's a skill that no one teaches you when you jump. And you have to figure that out. It's the marketing and the networking and the touch points and circling back to see if somebody opened an email or if they remember you from a newsletter or from a networking event, like little things like that, where sometimes it's really hard to measure whether or not it's been successful or not, unless you know that they were contacted 3 years ago, and then 3 years later they send you an email saying, "Oh, I remember you," and like, "Oh, now it works."
Yeah,
So
it's very invisible, isn't it?
it is,
right? Yeah.
And to continue on that analogy of farming, sometimes farmers scatter a bunch of seeds in the wind, but then they only get concerned with the ones that actually do start growing something. We don't know where the seeds went, the ones that are invisible. So I guess we continue to nurture the ones that do start to, show some kind of yield. And I think that's the same thing in business.
I think it's a really good analogy too, because sometimes, you scatter wildflower seeds and something else pops up. And you're like, where the heck did that come from? Right. And that's very true of entrepreneurship, where what you think you're going to, what we started with, the concept for Supplino, is not what we do today.
When you first started, what was the vision, and now how has it progressed?
When we started, we actually went through an accelerator program called FI, Founders Institute, which was great for us because it gave me some structure, right? I was jumping into new business. I had no idea, how do you manage a startup? How do you run it? What do I do? So this accelerator program was really helpful. And what I went through the accelerator with as an idea was a supply chain platform if you had a new product idea or you were launching a new product as a business, you could create and manage your supply chain on the platform. And what I learned when I talked to customers was they didn't really want a platform. They didn't want to be told how to do it. They didn't want to be forced into a certain process that someone else thought was the best practice. But what they really did want is help. So if we could find an expert that could help them do what they needed to do and get over whatever hurdle they were dealing with in their supply chain and in their manufacturing, that they were really interested in. And that's when we ended up pivoting into the marketplace that we are today.
And pivoting is a huge word because, in the pandemic, you had to pivot. And those who did well were the ones who knew how to pivot. And they had conversations with their clients and looked to see what's going on in the market and what do we need to do to change and survive.
Yeah, I got some excellent advice. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Ooh.
And yeah, isn't that good?
Yeah.
And it's a really important mantra that I use. And I've seen through, I now mentor at FI and I advise a lot of young startups. And you can very quickly see the ones that fall in love with their own solution. As soon as that solution doesn't have a client or a customer or runway, they fall apart.
I love it. I never heard that one. And it just reminds me of, the scientific process. You have to continuously be curious and to see where the data takes you, not what your hypothesis was to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. Same perspective on that, right?
Right. So tell me about some challenges that you think you've surmounted as you're going into your third year in business now.
I would say one challenge, and it's a typical one, the expectation of hustle culture for me was very strong. So when I came out of corporate, in my 50s, I think I was 52. When you do that, there's a lot of expectations that you think about entrepreneurship and what you need to do. And coming in and saying, I'm going to spend every waking moment on this business. I'm finally going to do something I'm super passionate about. And it was very quick to then experience burnout when that didn't immediately show results. That was hard, right? Because I had all this enthusiasm and I had a lifetime of waiting to jump and do this business. And all of a sudden, I'm not getting the results that I wanted. I'm spending all this time and all this mental energy on it. And I had to really take a step back. Wasn't taking any breaks. I wasn't taking vacation. Weekends, I would just sit and think about the business because I thought I should. That's what entrepreneurs do. You spend your whole life obsessed with your business.
So how do you prevent that burnout from happening? What did you do differently?
Burnout. So I don't know how to prevent it. It's a good question. I can only tell you what I did to respond to it. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's happened a couple times. I've burnt out. The nice thing is the second time it happened, I recognized it for what it was.
Right.
And I could use some of the lessons I learned the first time. So the first time, what really helped me was I got a business coach. And she really helped me reframe my expectations and think about, for example, this myth of, working all the time or you can't do anything else, or where that comes from and why do I think that? And is it real? What if you took 3 days and did nothing?
Yes, God forbid you didn't answer your emails for 3 days or didn't get back to a client within 10 minutes of receiving the email.
Yeah, exactly. Or what if you just didn't pay attention to it? It didn't even think about it over the weekend and went and did your hobby or, And I realized then that I myself was feeding myself a bunch of false expectations that I couldn't live up to and then beating myself up because I couldn't live up to them.
Yeah.
It was just a vicious cycle. And it was just a huge weight lifted when I worked with her on that. And that was probably, I want to say maybe a year and a half in when I hit that wall.
Would you say that exercise released you kind of that expectation and you were able to maybe redefine what it meant to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it brought the joy back into the work, right? I had really lost all the joy. I was just like grinding, working hard, focused on the business, but not doing it with any pleasure. And, to talk to someone about that, like a coach, and realize, wait a minute, I waited my whole career to do this. It's the best decision I've ever made and I'm not enjoying it. This is just silly. What am I doing?
One element of it has to be important and meaningful, and joy is a big part of it, to wake up and to always continuously be there and showing up for yourself. If that's not there anymore, then you're like, well, why am I doing this?
Right.
Yeah.
And, I'm part of a group of female founders. There's 4 of us, and we meet every week for an hour on Wednesdays. We have a Zoom call together. And it's really amazing how much we all struggle with this. And I think it's true not just of, entrepreneurs and startups, but business owners in general. It's a tough road to choose to do this. Yes. And it's not always fun. And I think you also have to kind of be kind to yourself and let yourself realize it isn't like playing a game or doing a hobby. It really is hard work. And sometimes it isn't going to be fun. And that's okay, as long as you can get through that period and still have joy in the overall of what you're doing. Right.
Right. And I love that you're surrounding yourself by other founders. Being surrounded by a community or a group is such an important part. And I've heard this over and over and over from other people that we've interviewed.
Catherine, I was so surprised when I came out of corporate at the helpfulness and the positivity of the ecosystem, let's say, that is entrepreneurialism. I really had a picture in my head about I was going to start this company, and it was going to be a bunch of 25-year-old guys in hoodies that are entrepreneurs, all kind of sneering at me like, what are you doing, lady? Instead, what I found was it's a much more diverse group of founders out there, and it's actually much nicer as an environment than corporate. Corporate is much more competitive. You're personally competing with other people to go up that ladder or to look good or to get time with an exec or to get sponsorship. Of course, in entrepreneurialism, of course you're competing. You want your business to do well, right? But this amount of support from entrepreneurs for each other, where people will just give you time and brainstorm with you and come up with ideas and have you tried this and I tried that and let me connect you with this other person that you might want to talk to. It's amazing. And it's true of, those same guys that I thought would be awful are really wonderful. The young guys, it really doesn't matter who you're talking to in this group. There's a lot of helpfulness, and everybody wants everybody else to win, which is really nice.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes. And it's not what you were expecting, was it?
No. No, that was part of the unexpected benefits that I got. Yeah.
Yes. And now when we're talking about corporate, how we have structures and we have all sorts of processes in place and departments, and it is rigid, as you were saying. How does that now differ in your own business? What kind of structures do you have in place?
That's a really good question. There's an app that I love called Chaos Control, and it's the best task manager. Yeah, there's a lot of task managers out there, but this one fits the way my brain works the best, I found. Yes. And it's one where you can take a large goal, kind of break it down into interim steps, and then assign yourself those tasks and projects and keep track of them, and it integrates into your calendar.
Oh, that's
so every
excellent.
day when I come in, I have a to-do list from that, as well as my appointments, and then I can manage by category. And it's a very intuitive, for me, structure that I'm using. I also, my co-founder and I, we have periodic checkpoints. We just had one for 2024 to say, what do we really want out of next year? What's the most important thing? And we had a conversation about not just what is the goal, because you're always going to put in an aggressive goal. I want sales to, 10x, 8x, 5x, whatever it is. But we also put in what we felt was a minimum floor, which is, okay, we're going to go for, let's say, 10x sales. But if sales aren't over 4x or 3x, we need to really take a step back and say, do we need to pivot?
That's interesting. And it goes back to the whole thing of how do we define success now that we are an entrepreneur? And what are the metrics? And you need to have a structure, you need to have goals. So do you find that now you have something?
I think that my metric for success, it's really all about looking at my actions. Are we generating the actions that we need to move the boat forward, right? And if we are, then I'm not going to worry about the success metric. That will get delivered and we'll see that coming. And we look at typical metrics that you're going to look at in a business on your funnel and your customers and your results. But I'm much more relaxed about those if we're missing them.
Yeah.
If I can see that the activity metrics and those action-oriented goals are underway. Right. And I'm much more, maybe it isn't the goals themselves, but my attitude towards them, I am much more flexible and relaxed about them and patient about, planting the seed than I ever was in corporate.
And then how do you deal with this need to continuously be nimble? Your structure has to be there, but then it also has to be flexible. How do you achieve that balance?
This is a constant challenge to know, when am I making too many changes too fast for the business? And when should I stay the course and introduce some steadiness? And that for me is the challenge of being the CEO. And I don't have a good answer for that because I think it's something that you navigate every day.
Right.
I mean, I'm a very creative person. My hobbies, I paint, I draw, I make things. As a creative person, I have new ideas all the time, which is quite dangerous for a CEO.
Why is it dangerous?
Because you always have a shiny new thing that you want to go after.
Yes.
And this is the last thing your team wants to hear. Your team is still trying to move forward with the assignment you gave them a month ago or 2 months ago or last week. What they don't want is you coming in and saying, oh, look, I found something completely different. Let's go all run and look at this thing over here.
Yes. And meantime, the team is saying, but wait, we haven't finished this stuff now that you've assigned us before. Yeah.
And I did all this good work and you're not going to let me see the benefit of that good work. Now I have to change into something else. And it's extremely frustrating for them. So that's something I have to keep in check. I keep a notebook with ideas and I write them down to try to get them out of my system that I can look at them later in a more organized way than try to drop them in, like little fireflies into what everybody's trying to do.
Well, I like it because what I'm seeing now is like a teeter-totter and a fulcrum, and then it's the whole balancing act between creativity and stability. So you're the creative person coming up with all these new ideas, which will feed a pipeline of things coming up. But then you also want the stability for your employees or your subcontractors because you want to keep them happy and you want to keep them around and motivated.
And it's not just the team too. I mean, you're not going to get results if you're changing your focus every 5 minutes, right?
Right.
When your team objects to something, typically they have a reason to object to something if you've got good people.
Yes.
But it can be very tempting. This is the difference, that now you are the person making those ultimate decisions versus being part of a structure and being an element, right, in the decisions. You're it now. Yeah.
You are. Tell me about what you thought entrepreneurship would look like, and tell me now the reality of what it is.
Oh, I was an avid entrepreneurship fan for many years, and still do really love to read success stories on people that are running really dynamic and great companies. But when you consume all that media, of course, it focuses on all the good and the positive and the fun things. And when it talks about challenges, it always talks about them in hindsight, how they fixed their challenge and how they overcame it and how, the company has grown as a result. The reality is that you are often in the middle of those challenges with no clear direction how to get out of them. And this is the entrepreneurial journey, doing that. It's not the result afterwards and the growth that comes from the result. It's the dealing and knowing how to navigate through these huge periods of uncertainty and gray and confusion and advice from many people that's contradictory, but all seems to make sense. And I think that's more the reality of entrepreneurship and in leadership as an entrepreneur, at least at this stage of my business. Maybe when the business has grown into a different stage and I'm more mature, then something else. But my reality is just constant struggle and navigation. Now, not to say, I don't want to imply that it's a horrible experience. I love it. And I think it uses all the skills that I've developed in the many years I worked, right? So I love this challenge, but the reality is that it's a challenge, right?
I wanted to ask you about advice because we've been talking about the advice that you have been getting, but what about advice that you could give to people who are considering starting their own business, or the learnings that you've had from the 3 years since you jumped from a corporate job to now running your own business?
If you haven't jumped yet and you're thinking about it, plan the jump. Don't just get frustrated and quit. Plan your jump thoughtfully and make sure that you have enough financial support and emotional support at home or wherever you are that you can do it. It's more difficult to create revenue from nothing if you haven't done it before. So I would say that's definitely one piece I would give. If someone's already jumped and you're already in it, my advice would be don't underestimate the difficulty. And if it's hard and you're struggling, that's normal. You are not doing anything wrong. It's easy to compare yourself, and you look at, Sarah Blakely from Spanx, and she makes it look so easy. It's not really that easy. And you just don't see, no one interviews you around the really hard stuff. So it's totally normal that you're struggling and that it's hard and that maybe you're not finding customers. It's okay. Keep going and talk to people and consider that advice of, have you fallen in love with the solution maybe more than the problem? And is that your problem? And then reconsider and really focus on what's the problem you're trying to solve. And the more you really listen to customers around that problem and pay attention to the problem, other solutions will raise their head that you can explore.
The people like me who did start off with barely anything, you don't just want jobs, you want clients. You want people to keep returning with more stuff in the pipeline so that you're not always doing a one-off job and then trying again to fill in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And so this whole plant the seed metrics and to see who's coming back and all that, that's super important. And the way you phrased it made a lot of sense to me. And also, falling in love with the problem is such an incredible mind shift in looking at how you run a business and what you do with it. As opposed to always being stuck with that one solution.
Right. And still trying to make it work,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like watching a child try to put those puzzles into the little holes, but they just can't put the star in the square, and it's just, not working.
Yeah. And no wonder, right? And I think as women also, we are very hesitant to bother other people, to ask for help, right? And not just ask for, help, like I'm burnt out or I need help, but to ask for like advice. I am continuously amazed, as I mentioned before, about how helpful other women business owners really are. If you're in that situation where it feels like you are sticking that, star-shaped game piece into this square hole and it's not working, who else runs a company that maybe is similar to yours or in that same industry that has done what you're trying to do that you could ask help from? I am shocked at how little women will reach out. I'll do a presentation and someone will say to me, "Oh my God, that was so helpful. I'd love to talk to you about my business." I say, "Great. Send me a note." I never hear from them. I think we don't talk to each other enough about the struggles versus kind of saying, "I'm fine and my business is doing great all the time."
Thank you so much to Michelle Peters. You can learn more about Michelle and Supplino through the links in the episode description. If you like the show, please rate, review, and subscribe to And So She Left wherever you listen. Your feedback helps us to better serve current listeners and reach new ones. You can also fill out our quick feedback form. It's just 5 questions long, and your response helps us to make the show that you want to hear. And So She Left is made by Cansulta and Ethan Lee. We'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Our music is by Chris Zabriskie, edited for your enjoyment. You can find a list of all the songs you heard here in the episode notes. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and thanks for listening.